This video is going to specifically focus on steps the government took to deal with gender discrimination. So, the 19th Amendment, which we mentioned previously a couple times this year, is clearly related to gender discrimination. 19th Amendment, passed and ratified in 1920, officially gave women the right to vote. Long overdue, but that's the significance of the 19th Amendment. Obviously, one of the most impactful amendments in American history, finally establishing women's suffrage rights. In 1963, Congress passed the Equal Pay Act, which made it illegal to discriminate pay for men and women. It's really hard to enforce, showing that employers are intentionally paying women less. And that's why, unfortunately, there's still a gender pay gap that exists in the United States today. But technically, by the letter of the law, it's illegal to pay men and women different for doing the same job, all other things being equal. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we already looked at sort of the implications for racial discrimination, but this also has some gender discrimination elements to it as well. It forbids gender to be considered as a condition for employment. Much like race can't be used as a disqualification, gender can't either as a sole reason. And then other significant sort of laws, Title IX was passed in 1972. Title IX is a landmark law in American history that prevents women from being discriminated against, females in educational institutions that receive any kind of federal funds from taxpayers or from the government. The specific focus of this law was extracurricular opportunities. That it was clear in the 1960s and early 1970s, especially in public high schools and public universities, women were not given the opportunity to play sports and participate in other extracurriculars. This mandated that was illegal and was discriminatory, and that women and men had to be provided with the same sort of amount of opportunity. So, Title IX is another significant piece of gender-related sort of discrimination legislation that's been passed by our government. Interesting to note, there are a couple failed attempts to sort of deal with gender discrimination. In 1973, the ERA Amendment was passed, essentially the Equal Rights Amendment, which you can look at the text of the law or the amendment. It says, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. This would have specifically written this into the Constitution. But there was never quite enough support for this amendment, so it was actually one of the failed amendments. Was never ratified, despite the fact that it was approved by Congress. They couldn't get enough states to actually ratify the amendment. Kind of see when all of the states sort of did this, and the states still have not taken it upon themselves to ratify the amendment. Basically falling one state short. Virginia, since this slide has been created, actually was the most recent state to ratify this. It's probably too late. This amendment is officially probably has expired, but symbolically, Virginia just last year, in I guess late 2019, early 2020, became the most recent state to ratify the amendment, sort of giving it the official number needed for ratification. Just too late. More of a symbolic gesture than anything else. And you might say, why was this defeated? You might be interested to know that one of the major sort of opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment was actually a woman named Phyllis Schlafly, who really led the movement to defeat ERA. Many conservative women were concerned that an amendment that specifically said that men and women would have to be treated equally might take away some of the privileges that women enjoyed, such as separate restrooms. There was this argument that if the ERA amendment was adopted, you wouldn't have separate restrooms anymore, which is probably kind of silly. Or the fact that you could get spousal support, or women have typically been favored in many cases in child custody disputes, or the fact that women were exempted from the draft. The concern from conservative women was that these sort of privileges would be taken away with the passing of the ERA amendment. So Phyllis Schlafly was a major sort of driving force in preventing ERA from actually being adopted.